Hey, so let me tell you about Jane. She's 31, lives in this buzzing city, owns her own condo, and works as a financial analyst, basically. Her life revolves around numbers making sense. But here's the thing, while she's got her career and her independence, her family has been complicated, to say the least, and not in a cute, quirky way. There's a story about boundaries, money, and realizing when enough is enough. By the way, I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? What's it like there? Growing up, Jane's family had this unspoken currency that wasn't money in the usual sense. It was how love and care were measured. For her dad, Patrick, providing financially was the ultimate expression of love. He wasn't the type to sit down and talk about feelings or emotions. His way of saying, "I care," was paying bills, fixing things, and making sure the household ran smoothly. When her mom was alive, there was a balance. Mom brought warmth, guidance, and presence into the family, teaching Jane and Mark that love wasn't just dollars and cents. But when she passed away, that balance disappeared almost overnight, and the financial language became dominant. Jane learned early on that being responsible meant keeping the family afloat. She was the planner, the one who could be counted on to handle crises, to make sense of numbers, to make sure everyone was taken care of. In a way, she absorbed her father's worldview like a sponge. If a bill needed paying, a loan covering, a medical expense handled, Jane's name was the one people instinctively turned to. It wasn't written anywhere. It wasn't a conversation she had. It was just expected. She internalized it because in her mind, that's how you showed love. Mark, on the other hand, had a very different path. He was younger by 4 years, a dreamer with music in his veins. He floated through life on a cloud of potential and creativity, never quite tethered to the financial realities that grounded Jane. His guitar, his amps, his gigs, these were investments in his future that Jane, quietly, ended up funding. Patrick, instead of seeing this as irresponsibility, framed it as nurturing the artistic soul. Mark didn't have to struggle in the traditional sense because Jane's hard work supported his dreams. In the family's eyes, it was a win-win. Mark was allowed to explore and create, and Jane was fulfilling her role as the responsible one. What's fascinating is how the roles were so clearly divided without anyone ever saying a word about it. Jane was the foundation, the pillar of stability. Mark was the beautiful vine that grew on that foundation, protected, encouraged, and sometimes indulgently excused for mistakes. From a distance, it might seem like a natural sibling dynamic, but up close, it was far more complex. Jane's every success, every carefully calculated career move, every dollar she earned was quietly funneled into a system that made her the family's financial backbone. And over the years, that system didn't just continue, it calcified. The first hints of this pattern were small, almost invisible. A broken car, a shortfall in rent, a need for extra cash to cover emergencies. These were all things that Jane solved with almost mechanical efficiency. She kept track of it all meticulously, a habit borrowed from her work as a financial analyst. Initially, she even labeled it as loans to Mark. But after the first year, the word loan seemed misleading. This wasn't about lending, it was about maintaining the family engine. So she renamed it Family Support. The renaming, small as it might sound, was the quiet admission of a truth she hadn't wanted to face. She was not just helping, she was sustaining. Patrick reinforced these dynamics with subtle but powerful cues. He would call Jane, not to ask, but to instruct. Mark needs about $600 for his rent this month. Janie, just take care of it. There was no discussion, no debate. It was the natural order of things. And Jane, trained to see financial support as love, complied without protest, the logical extension of a childhood spent internalizing the rules of her father's world. Her own needs, her own ambitions, were quietly relegated to secondary importance. She learned that providing was a form of affection, and withholding it even for herself felt almost wrong. Meanwhile, Mark grew in this protected space. He developed a sense of charm and charisma, a way of navigating life that relied less on preparation and more on presence and personality. He could enter a room, play a song on his guitar, and command attention, and the family would forgive any lack of financial responsibility. It wasn't that they didn't notice the imbalance. It was that the imbalance was acceptable because it fit the narrative. Mark was the fragile dreamer who needed to be shielded. Jane was the capable one who could absorb the friction of reality. Love, in that sense, was conditional and transactional. The more Jane contributed, the more the system worked, and the more she was quietly rewarded with the sense that she was fulfilling her purpose. But there was a cost. Her life became measured not in milestones or dreams, but in spreadsheets and bank transfers. This division wasn't merely about money, it seeped into every part of their interactions. Jane handled logistics, planned appointments, scheduled doctor visits for their father, remembered birthdays, and coordinated family events. Mark's contributions were more ephemeral. He brought joy, music, and the lightness that came from his free-spirited nature. To the casual observer, it might have looked like a balance of practical and creative strengths. But the reality was that Jane's labor, both emotional and financial, created the conditions for Mark's freedom. And the more she invested, the more the patterns solidified. Almost invisibly, into a family norm. Jane's father, still grieving the loss of his wife, leaned even harder into this structure. Providing financially became his sole language of care, and Jane became its fluent speaker. Her mother's absence left a void of emotional nuance that money alone could never fill. But in Patrick's eyes, it was the best approximation. Jane, sensitive to this, absorbed both the praise and the guilt, believing that her contributions were not just expected, they were necessary. And so, over the years, her role hardened. She was the safety net, the emergency fund, the quiet engine behind the family's comfort. Her own ambitions were folded into a larger narrative of duty, where success meant more than personal satisfaction. It meant validation through service. There were moments, fleeting though they were, when Jane glimpsed the inequity of it all. A birthday wish left unsaid, a small thank you overlooked, a subtle comparison between her diligence and Mark's artistic flights of fancy. These moments would sting, but they were quickly rationalized. She reminded herself that she loved her family, that she wanted to support Mark's potential, that this was her contribution to a greater good. Yet underneath, a tension simmered. The more she gave, the more invisible her own needs became. Her identity was increasingly entwined with this system of financial care, and the unspoken rules were hardwired. Jane provides, Mark creates, Patrick judges through dollars, and the cycle continues. Looking back, Jane realized that the lessons of her childhood had done more than teach her about money. They shaped her sense of obligation, of self-worth, and of love. They set the stage for her adult life, where financial acumen and careful planning became both armor and chain. She was brilliant at numbers, excelled at her job, and saved meticulously. But all of it was conducted within the context of this family system. Her generosity was not entirely voluntary. It was part of a contract she had never signed. A set of expectations that were ingrained before she even realized it. By the time she was in her 20s, Jane had internalized the family roles completely. She wasn't just providing for emergencies anymore. She was investing in the ongoing operation of her family's happiness and stability. Mark's creative pursuits, her father's sense of pride, the quiet moments of family life, they all depended on her careful stewardship. And yet, even as she fulfilled her duties flawlessly, she began to sense that her own dreams were deferred, delayed, and sometimes overshadowed by the very people she loved. It was a subtle, pervasive tension that colored every decision, every achievement, every plan she made. And she would carry it, consciously or not, into the decades ahead, until a single moment forced her to confront the full weight of her role and the price she had paid for compliance. After Jane's mom passed away, the joint savings account her mother had left became this quiet hub of her life, like the center of a web that tied her to her family. Her dad had said, almost reverently, that she should manage it. "You're good with money, Jane," he had told her, his voice heavy with grief. It felt like a sacred trust at the time. She was 21, ambitious, careful, and suddenly responsible for a pile of cash that wasn't exactly hers, but not really theirs either. Over the years, that account grew to hold the bulk of her contributions, bonuses, salary deposits. Anything she could set aside went in there. And, of course, it became the source for covering Mark's little emergencies. Broken car, transfer from Jane. Short on rent, transfer from Jane. Studio time for a demo album, that was Jane too. She kept meticulous records, like an accountant who couldn't help herself, first labeling them as loans to Mark, and then, after a year, the more honest term family support. The spreadsheet grew and grew, a silent testimony to years of unspoken responsibility. Buying her condo should have been the moment everything shifted, right? She'd worked for it, saved for it, and had invested in it wisely. It was a 2-bedroom apartment, small balcony overlooking a park, a personal dream realized through discipline and strategy. But even that milestone didn't escape the family dynamic. Her dad's reaction was lukewarm. "That's a lot of money. Jane, are you sure you can handle it?" he asked, frowning as though the idea of his daughter owning property independently was some sort of error in the system. No congratulations, no pride. Just subtle concern for the joint account, which, in his mind, remained the family's primary asset. Jane had to sit him down with spreadsheets and projections to prove she wasn't draining the account, that she was using her own portion. Even then, a subtle guilt lingered, a reminder that her life's work, her condo, her salary, her savings was still, in some way, for the family. Her home was technically hers on paper, but emotionally and socially, it wasn't. It was another piece of the family puzzle, another part of the system she'd been carrying for years. And then there was Mark. He could float into family dinners with his guitar, play a few new songs, charm everyone, and leave. No responsibility, no financial contribution, just presence. He was the heart, she was the wallet. Dad would watch him, pride misting his eyes, and Jane would feel this gnawing mix of pride and quiet resentment. Her contributions weren't invisible, exactly, but they were expected, normalized, almost invisible in how they were valued. The condo purchase itself wasn't just a financial transaction, it was a subtle extension of the pattern. Jane had put her name and her father's name on the deed, thinking practically about inheritance and family harmony. But deep down, she knew why another gesture, another demonstration of loyalty. She owned it, but somehow, in the family's eyes, it remained communal, managed by her, funded by her, but not solely hers. And for years, she just kept going, contributing, hoping, maybe even believing, that one day her sacrifices would be seen for what they were: love, not obligation. Her sense of duty was unwavering. Every payment, every transfer, every meticulous entry in her family support spreadsheet was a part of who she was. She couldn't imagine not doing it, even if a small part of her wanted to rebel quietly. Her personal milestones, her condo, her savings, even her promotions, they were always shadowed by the looming needs of the family. Mark's ambitions, her father's expectations, emergencies real and imagined, all took precedence. It wasn't that Jane didn't want her family to succeed, it was that their success seemed endlessly dependent on her. Sometimes, late at night, she would sit in her condo, looking out over the city lights, spreadsheet open, numbers climbing, and feel this mix of pride and exhaustion. She had built her life with precision, yet she lived it within invisible boundaries, dictated by years of expectations. The condo, her financial achievements, even her sense of accomplishment were subtly constrained by this invisible tether. Every bonus she earned, every smart investment, every careful plan for the future felt partly owned by the family. And she accepted it because rejecting it felt wrong, like breaking a rule that had been ingrained since childhood. Yet, even within this pattern, she was astutely aware of the imbalance. She recognized it intellectually, but emotionally, she justified it. Love and responsibility were intertwined in her mind. Paying for Mark's rent was not just a duty, it was an act of care, a way to express affection through the language she had learned so young. Keeping the spreadsheets, tracking every dollar, was a way to make sense of it all, to maintain order in a life that often felt dictated by everyone else's needs. The joint account wasn't just money, it was a symbol, a physical representation of her role, her responsibilities, her identity as the caretaker. It held the weight of years, the accumulated sacrifices, the invisible labor that defined her relationship with her family. Every contribution she made to Mark or her father was meticulously logged, a testament to both her generosity and the exploitation she was only beginning to understand fully. Yet, at the time, it just felt like part of her job as the responsible daughter. And so Jane moved through her 20s and early 30s like this, balancing her life carefully, her career, her condo, her personal goals, all managed alongside the ongoing demands of her family. Every financial obligation, every careful calculation reinforced the pattern. She became highly skilled at navigating the system, at providing, at predicting needs, and at keeping her family afloat. But it came with a cost. Her accomplishments were never purely hers. They were filtered through the expectations, needs, and unspoken rules of the family she loved. Looking back, it's clear that managing that joint account, funding Mark's dreams, and protecting her father's sense of stability wasn't just about money. It was about identity, about the roles assigned and accepted, about a lifetime of being the responsible one while the rest of the family floated in their own spheres. And even as she celebrated personal wins like her condo, her promotions, and her savings milestones, she carried this quiet weight. It was invisible to everyone else, but it defined her life, her choices, and ultimately set the stage for the confrontation that would force her to finally reckon with it all. It was a Sunday, and Jane had walked into her father's house, carrying a bottle of champagne, her heart genuinely light for the first time in a while. Mark was engaged, Phoebe was glowing, and for a brief moment, the house smelled of garlic and oregano instead of tension. They sat down to dinner, everyone in good spirits, and for a second, Jane allowed herself to relax. Maybe this was a turning point. Maybe Mark was stepping into responsibility. Maybe, just maybe, the family dynamic could shift. Phoebe started gushing about their plans, detailing a rustic upstate barn, a string quartet, 150 catered dinners, and a 10-day honeymoon in Tuscany. Jane smiled, nodding politely, but inside, her analyst brain started calculating the budget, the costs, the sheer scale. It was staggering. She hesitated before asking, trying to keep her tone light. "Have you guys started to think about a budget?" Mark waved her off with a dismissive hand. "We're working on it. Actually, there's something we wanted to talk to you and Dad about tonight." Her stomach tightened. She had a sinking feeling she already knew what was coming. Her father cleared his throat, shifting into that serious patriarch tone Jane had learned to recognize. He didn't soften, didn't preface with niceties. "Jane, Mark and Phoebe have some big plans, and they're going to need our help to get started." Jane nodded slowly, bracing herself. "Of course. I'd be happy to help you two set up a savings plan. Maybe look at some wedding-specific investment options," she said, trying to frame it rationally. Mark cut her off abruptly, his laugh short and sharp. "No, Janie, we're not talking about a savings plan." Jane blinked, confusion giving way to alarm. "Wait, what do you mean?" Mark's grin widened, oblivious to her rising panic. "We're talking about you paying for it." For a moment, she was frozen, the words hovering in the air like smoke. She must have misheard. "I'm sorry, what did you just say?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. He leaned back, almost casually. "The wedding? About $60,000. You'll be paying for it. It's only fair." Fair Jane stared at him, dumbfounded. The casual entitlement in his tone was staggering. Her mind raced through every payment, every rent transfer, every car repair, every studio session she'd financed over the years. She thought she understood responsibility. But this was audacious. She glanced at her father, hoping he would intervene, tell Mark how insane he was being. But Patrick just sat there, expression unreadable, waiting for her response as though the answer were obvious. "Fair," she finally managed, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Mark, how could that possibly be fair? It's a huge amount of money. I have my own life, my mortgage to pay." Mark's expression shifted to defensive. "Well, you're the one with all the money." Jane, you've always taken care of things. Phoebe and I can't afford a wedding like this on our own. She deserves her dream day. Jane felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the same tension she'd carried her whole adult life. Every transaction, every unpaid expectation, every sacrifice had led to this moment. She could feel the anger bubbling up, slow and steady, laced with years of pent-up frustration. A bigger thing? Mark. This isn't like covering your rent or fixing your car. $60,000 isn't a small favor. It's my life, my savings, my future. Phoebe chimed in, her voice sweet, almost syrupy. We thought of it as an early wedding gift, Jane, really generous. An investment in our future happiness. Investment. The word hit her like a slap. Every dollar she had given over the years wasn't generosity. It was collateral for their happiness. Her patience, her money, her future had been treated as assets to leverage. She could feel the weight of it, the unspoken contract she had been abiding by for more than a decade. And finally, for the first time, clarity cut through the fog. This wasn't love. It was exploitation. Every small transfer, every ignored loan, every unquestioned payment they had taught her how to be treated. Her voice firm, words sharp. No, absolutely not. I will not be paying $60,000 for your wedding. Mark's face went red. Shock mingled with indignation. What do you mean, no? After everything Dad and I have done for you, everything. Jane laughed, bitter and incredulous. Everything, Mark. What exactly have you done for me, besides creating a constant financial drain for the last decade? The anger surged, unrelenting now. Her voice rose, not with tears, but with resolve. She had spent years acquiescing, justifying, and protecting their dreams. But this was the breaking point. Patrick slammed his fist on the table. The sound echoed, plates and glasses jumping slightly. Jane, that's enough. You will not speak to your brother that way. He is getting married. This is what family does. We support each other. You have the money in that account. You will give it to him. Her voice didn't waver. It's not the money. Dad, it's my money. I earned it, and I'm not using it to fund a lavish party. Patrick's face darkened further. It is there for times like this, for family needs. Your brother wanting a rustic chic wedding is not a family need. Jane stood, matching his intensity, every syllable deliberate. A medical emergency is a need. Losing a job is a need. This is a want, an entitled, ridiculous want. I will not be the source of that. Mark and Phoebe were stunned, visibly shaken, their smiles fading. Jane could feel the power shift, feel herself reclaiming something she hadn't even realized she'd lost. Patrick stepped toward her, finger jabbing the air, voice low and menacing. I am your father, and I am telling you to do this. You have a duty to your brother. Jane took a deep breath, calm but resolute. My duty doesn't extend to bankrupting myself for his fantasy. Then you can tell yourself I am no daughter of yours. She spat back, every word dripping with finality. I'm making my choice. The ultimatum hung in the room, a weapon wielded subtly for years, now exposed in full. Her place in the family, her role as the compliant, dutiful daughter, had been transactional. And now she refused to pay the price. She grabbed her purse, the motion deliberate, leaving the scent of lasagna and the wreckage of expectations behind her. Walking out the door, Every step felt heavy with the weight of the past, and yet liberating. The unspoken agreement, the one she had unknowingly upheld for more than a decade, had shattered in a single confrontation. For the first time, she recognized it fully. This was not about family. It was about control, about entitlement, about years of her being treated as the endless well of cash, the one who would always absorb the costs. Driving back to her condo, the streetlights blurred past, mirroring the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Patrick's words echoed, "Don't bother coming home again." The word home felt hollow. The house, the childhood memories, even her father and brother, everything had revealed itself as part of a system where her sacrifice was assumed, demanded, and never acknowledged. The condo, her sanctuary, her carefully built life was the only space where she still held full control. Yet even there, the reality of the deed, the legal technicality that included her father's name, reminded her of how far the manipulation had reached. And in that moment, as the adrenaline and rage coursed through her, Jane realized something critical. This wasn't just about a wedding. This was about every transfer, every paid bill, every compromise she had ever made. It was a test of compliance, a check on her willingness to continue being the family's financial backbone. And she would no longer be that. The scales of exploitation had tipped, and she was reclaiming agency, even if it meant walking away from the family she had always loved. Sitting in her condo that night, Jane couldn't stop replaying the dinner. Every word, every smirk, every casual expectation she had lived it 1,000 times before, but hearing it laid bare like that made it impossible to ignore. She thought about all the little ways she'd enabled them, all the ways she'd absorbed their needs, normalized their requests, and justified it in her head as love. But now, in the quiet of her apartment, it hit her. This wasn't love. It was exploitation. She walked over to her laptop and opened the folder she had always kept tucked away, the one that held her detailed records of every transfer she had made over the years. She had meticulously logged Mark's rent, his car repairs, his trips, the countless studio sessions for his music, and the occasional transfers to her father when his pension or business fell short. Each entry was a line item, neat, organized, labeled under family support. At first, it had just been a way to stay organized, a habit picked up from her analyst work. But tonight, each number felt heavier than she remembered, a small testament to years of being the family's financial backbone. She opened the spreadsheet, slowly, almost hesitating, and scrolled down through the years. There was a part of her that already knew the total would be shocking. She had always felt it in the quiet moments of looking at her account balances, the constant calculations of what she could spare, the mental ledger she kept of who owed what. But seeing it all laid out, line by line, in black and white, was another kind of reality. She clicked through tabs, checking entries, reconciling old bank statements with the amounts she'd documented. Her heart began to pound as the numbers climbed higher, the total swelling in front of her eyes. By the time she finished, her breath caught. 10 years, $97,450, nearly $100,000 funneled to them. It was a staggering sum. The kind of money that could have been a down payment on a larger house, a seed for an investment portfolio, a cushion that could have made her future secure. Instead, it had been siphoned off quietly, invisibly, as if her sacrifices were just part of the natural order of things. It wasn't just the money, it was the time, the mental energy, the constant alertness to their needs, the ways her own ambitions had been sidelined. Every dollar, every transaction, every unpaid expectation had added up into this enormous weight she had carried silently for years. But it wasn't just the totals that shocked her. As she went through the entries, a pattern started to emerge, small discrepancies, numbers that didn't quite add up, stories that had been told to justify the withdrawals that didn't match reality. She clicked on the entry for Mark's demo album, the one he had promised would be a family investment. $10,000. She remembered the conversation vividly he had spoken with bright-eyed confidence about how they'd recoup it tenfold once he got signed. That promise had felt reassuring at the time, comforting even. But now, she felt a cold knot of disbelief in her stomach. She dialed the studio, pretending to be a potential client interested in booking a session. She asked about rates for a full demo package. The number they quoted barely scratched 5,000. 10,000. She had given him double what the service actually cost. Her mind raced. Where had the other 5,000 gone? And then she remembered Phoebe's posts around that time, a trip to Cancun, designer bags, a new laptop. When she compared the dates to her spreadsheet, the timeline lined up perfectly. The realization was brutal. They had assumed, without any hesitation, that she would never check. They had assumed she would continue to be the endless provider, the unquestioning supporter, the silent source of funding for their comfort and lifestyle. Her stomach turned, a mix of anger and disbelief. She scrolled through years of social media, cross-referencing posts with her spreadsheets. The pattern was clear. Each emergency was followed by luxuries and indulgences she had unwittingly financed. Expensive dinners, trips, gifts. It all bore her stamp, her money. She realized that the sense of obligation she had felt, the guilt she had absorbed, the belief that she was helping, had all been manipulated. They hadn't just taken advantage of her generosity, they had relied on it, expected it, and built their lives around her compliance. And then there was the condo, her sanctuary, her achievement, partially compromised by a naive attempt to appease her father, his name on the deed. She had thought it practical, a way to smooth inheritance and maintain peace. Now, she saw it for what it really was, another lever of control. The realization made her blood boil, the naivety of her younger self glaring back at her like a warning she had ignored. Patrick had no financial stake in the condo, not a single cent, but his name there gave him leverage. For years, she had been technically independent, but emotionally and strategically. She had been trapped. She leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes, trying to process the full scale of what she was seeing. 10 years, almost 100 grand, countless moments of self-sacrifice, the lies, the manipulation, the normalization of her role as the family's financial engine. Every story they told, every casual demand, every quiet nod of approval from her father for Mark's indulgences had been a piece of this intricate pattern. And for the first time, she understood it, the sense of duty she had clung to, the belief that she was supporting them out of love, had been weaponized. She was not just enabling, she had been complicit. Yes, but unwittingly, in a system that treated her generosity as a default. her life as collateral, her future as negotiable. Her hands shook slightly as she opened a new tab in the spreadsheet, labeling it Ledger of Lies. Each questionable transaction, each embellished story, each false emergency was logged and categorized. The demo album, the Cancun trip, the so-called medical bills that were never that serious. They all had a place now, documented meticulously. This wasn't about obsession, it was about clarity, about seeing the truth of what had happened over a decade, about giving herself the tools to reclaim control. Jane stared at the numbers, the patterns, the evidence of manipulation and entitlement, and something inside her shifted. Disbelief turned to anger, anger to resolve. She could no longer pretend that her role was voluntary. She could no longer ignore the reality that for years she had been taken advantage of by the people she loved most. The spreadsheet wasn't just numbers, it was proof, validation, a record that made the invisible visible. And for the first time, it became a weapon in her mind not to hurt them, but to protect herself, to reclaim what was hers. She thought about all the times she had justified their behavior, Mark's talent, her father's grief, the idea that family was about sacrifice. Those reasons, once comforting, now felt hollow. Excuses for her own exploitation. And she recognized the critical truth: she had been conditioned to accept this pattern, to participate willingly in her own subordination. The family had taught her compliance, and she had excelled at it, but it had come at a cost: her independence, her financial security, her peace of mind. Jane closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The anger was still there, simmering, but beneath it was a clear, calm focus. She had the evidence, she had the documentation, she had the understanding. The past 10 years, every penny and every misstep were now mapped out in front of her, undeniable. She knew the next steps would be difficult, perhaps even painful, but she also knew she had the clarity to act strategically, deliberately. The pattern was no longer invisible, the exploitation was no longer hidden, and she was done being a passive participant for hours. She worked in that quiet apartment, reviewing entries, verifying transactions, cross-referencing social media posts, reconstructing timelines. Each discovery fueled her resolve, each confirmation of deception, each record of manipulation strengthened her determination. She was methodical, precise, relentless. This wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming autonomy, reclaiming dignity, and breaking a cycle that had defined her adult life. And in that moment, Jane finally understood the power of the ledger she had created. It was a mirror of truth, a map of the past, and the foundation for her liberation. Once Jane had fully absorbed the reality of her decade-long sacrifices and the deception layered over them, she realized that passive outrage wasn't going to help her reclaim control. The first thing she needed to do was secure her financial assets, the joint savings account that had been the family's lever over her life for years. She logged into the online banking portal, her fingers hovering over the keyboard for a moment. The stakes were high. If her father acted quickly, he could, in theory, access the funds before she had a chance to protect them. Her heart was hammering, but her mind was clear. She had always been a careful planner, an analyst who thrived on precision, and now she had to apply that same rigor to her own life. She initiated a transfer to a newly opened account, one entirely under her name. This wasn't just any account, it was a sanctuary, a vault that belonged solely to her, built to hold the remainder of her life savings. The cushion she had painstakingly rebuilt after buying the condo. The transfer was meticulous, down to the last cent, and she paused just a beat before confirming, recognizing that this was the point of no return. One click and the leverage her family had held over her for years would be gone. The confirmation screen appeared. The money was safe, hers alone. Relief washed over her, dizzying and profound, but she didn't linger. There was more to do. The joint account had been closed using the bank's secure messaging system, with a simple, understated note. Account no longer needed. It felt like the most minimal statement for what was a monumental move. The account that had tethered her to their expectations for over a decade was finally being severed. Next, the condo, her sanctuary. The legal technicality of her father's name on the deed had always been a lingering source of subtle control, and she knew she had to address it methodically. Calling the lawyer who had handled the closing, she asked about options for removing a joint tenant from a deed. Her heart sank when the lawyer explained the path's voluntary signing by Patrick via a quitclaim deed, the cleanest and simplest solution, or a court-mandated partition sale, which could be messy, expensive, and public. The lawyer's words hit her if he refused. She could be forced into a legal battle that might jeopardize the property. She swallowed hard, the reality of leverage and control pressing down, but her mind immediately began calculating possibilities. Jane realized that while Patrick could refuse, he had never contributed a cent to the condo. Every dollar of the down payment, every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every improvement had come from her own income. That fact documented, undeniable. Precise was her leverage, legally. He could create problems, delay, make noise, but the paper trail was overwhelmingly in her favor. She took a deep breath, letting herself focus on the facts. This was not just about money. This was about strategy, about using reason and evidence against years of manipulation. She moved on to the final and perhaps most sensitive piece of the puzzle: communication. Jane needed to assert her new boundaries clearly, professionally, and without leaving room for emotional argument. She drafted an email to Patrick and Mark, crafting each line carefully. The subject line was simple, neutral, regarding our finances and the condo. She began the message without sentimentality, without the usual framing of love or duty. She outlined her review of financial contributions over the past 10 years, attaching a clean, professionally formatted spreadsheet of the family support ledger. Every contribution totaled, every discrepancy noted. This was evidence, not argument. She wrote with a careful balance of clarity and calm authority, explaining that the joint account had been closed and the funds moved to her sole ownership. Then came the critical part, the condo. She documented the total of her contributions to the property, all from her personal income, and outlined her legal plan to have the deed updated to reflect sole ownership. She proposed the cleanest solution, Patrick signing the quitclaim deed voluntarily, and she included the implicit legal consequences of refusal. Framed logically and factually, a partition suit, public record, lengthy and expensive process. She didn't need to threaten emotionally. The law and the evidence were her leverage. Jane read over the email, each sentence carefully considered. Her voice in her head was steady but slightly imperfect, the kind of natural human tone she might use when explaining something complex to a colleague. She made sure it didn't read like anger or revenge. It read like strategy, precision, and firm boundaries. The goal was clear: protect her assets, assert control, and leave no ambiguity. She hit send, and for a moment, the silence in her apartment was almost physical. This was the preemptive strike she had envisioned, the culmination of months of analysis and years of observation. The responsibility now shifted to them to respond. Throughout the rest of the day, she oscillated between focus and anxious anticipation. Part of her tried to work, opening her spreadsheets for analysis and budgeting, but her mind kept drifting back to the email, to the potential fallout. Would they try to manipulate her? Would there be calls, texts, confrontations? She forced herself to plan, mentally mapping possible responses and appropriate strategies. Her training as an analyst kicked in fully now, not for the stock market, not for spreadsheets at work, but for her own life, her own autonomy. By evening, she had a clear workflow. She would track communications, maintain evidence, and refrain from engaging emotionally. Each potential tactic from her father and brother was a scenario she had already considered. If they tried to charm, she would respond only with documentation. If they escalated emotionally, she would stay calm and rational. She had anticipated manipulation and had built her defenses accordingly. The power in the situation was shifting, subtly but undeniably. Jane wasn't just reacting, she was orchestrating, methodical and deliberate. She reflected on her thought process. For years, she'd been caught in a cycle of compliance and expectation, absorbing the family's needs as part of her identity. Now, she was reclaiming that identity, dismantling the unspoken rules that had dictated her life. Every transfer she had made, every sacrifice, every ignored personal desire, all of it was being accounted for, recognized, and used strategically to assert independence. She felt a mixture of exhilaration and relief, tempered by the gravity of the stakes. This wasn't just a financial decision, it was the assertion of her right to exist independently, without obligation, without silent coercion. She walked through scenarios in her mind: Patrick refusing the deed, Mark questioning the spreadsheet, potential emotional escalation. But she was prepared. She had evidence, legal advice, and the mental clarity that comes from meticulous preparation. Her actions weren't impulsive, they were deliberate. A chess game played with precision, and for the first time in years, she was the one controlling the board. As the night wore on, Jane's apartment became both command center and sanctuary. The spreadsheet sat open, the legal correspondence ready, her mind tracing each possible contingency. She sipped tea, breathing deeply, grounding herself in the reality that she had prepared for this moment. No one could leverage her assets without her consent. No one could manipulate her decisions. She had acted, and she had acted with foresight, precision, and unwavering determination. There was a tension in the air, a kind of anticipatory suspense. She didn't know how her father or brother would react, but that uncertainty was no longer paralyzing. It was a signal of the stakes involved, a recognition that her life, her property, and her hard-earned resources were being claimed as hers, and that claim would not be negotiated emotionally or coercively. Jane had created a situation where the facts, the law, and her careful preparation were on her side. Any attempt to interfere without merit would be immediately evident. In reflecting on the steps she had taken, Jane recognized a shift in herself. The fear and guilt that had accompanied years of financial caretaking were replaced by clarity and resolve. She had converted a decade of meticulous record-keeping and personal sacrifice into actionable leverage. The spreadsheet, once a symbol of compliance and obligation, had become a tool of empowerment. The joint account, once a source of vulnerability, was now secured. The condo, a source of subtle manipulation, was the next battleground, now framed with legal and factual precision, and her communication, carefully crafted, had established boundaries that could not easily be crossed. By the time she closed her laptop, Jane felt an unusual calm. The storm of confrontation had not yet arrived, but she was ready. Her plan was complete, her assets protected, her strategy articulated. She had transformed years of subservience into agency, and while she knew the fallout might be difficult, she was confident in her ability to navigate it. For the first time, she was operating entirely on her terms, using logic, documentation, and preparation as armor. The ledger of her past sacrifices was no longer a weight. It was a shield, a declaration, and a foundation for the independent life she was finally claiming for herself. The days after Jane sent the email were tense, a quiet storm brewing in the digital world and on her phone. At first, there was nothing, just the kind of unsettling silence that makes you second-guess every decision. Then it began. Notifications started piling up, messages, calls, texts, all from her father, Mark, and Phoebe. She watched the screen light up, one alert after another, and felt the familiar adrenaline spike. The old instinct to respond, to soothe, to explain. But this time, she resisted. Social media followed quickly. Phoebe had posted a long, rambling message set to public, painting a picture of a bitter, jealous sister blocking their dreams. The post didn't use Jane's name, but the details made it obvious. Jane scrolled carefully, taking screenshots, making note of dates, comments, and interactions. She wasn't angry, not yet. She was meticulous. Every line, every reaction, every sympathetic friend's comment was documented. It was all part of the record, the evidence that would be useful if things escalated. This wasn't about revenge. It was about preparation. The comments under Phoebe's post were predictable. Friends and distant relatives chimed in with sympathy, calling her actions toxic, manipulative, cruel. Some offered advice to cut Jane out of the wedding plans entirely. Jane didn't read them for emotion. She read them for patterns, for confirmation of the narrative her family was trying to spin, and for clues about their strategy. Each sympathetic remark was logged and annotated. It was almost surreal, watching their attempts to control the story unfold publicly, as if they assumed she would panic, crumble, or respond impulsively. But she didn't. She stayed calm, cool, and methodical. Meanwhile, the calls didn't stop. Her phone buzzed constantly, a relentless onslaught. Dad called first, then Mark, then Phoebe, then her father again, looping through desperate attempts to break her concentration and manipulate her into engagement. Each ring was a test, a challenge, a subtle reminder of the years she had silently accommodated. Jane didn't answer, not a single call. She let them ring, knowing that responding emotionally would be exactly what they wanted. Each unreturned call was a small assertion of power, a boundary enforced silently but unmistakably. Texts came next, frantic, fragmented, laced with urgency and guilt. Jane, pick up the phone, Dad is asking for you. How can you be so heartless? Then another, your father is in the hospital because of you. Phoebe and I are here. The doctors are worried. Her chest tightened for a brief second instinct, old patterns, but she stopped herself. Panic would only feed the manipulation. She opened a new folder, labeled it Evidence Communications, and began saving screenshots. Date, time, sender, content, everything. She didn't respond, didn't argue, didn't justify. She documented. That was her power. Jane understood their game. The panic attack, the hospital, the sudden urgency, it was all a high-stakes negotiation tactic. They were attempting to create guilt, fear, and compliance. They were counting on her conditioning, the years of obedience, the ingrained belief that family crises required immediate intervention. But she saw it clearly now. She wasn't playing by their rules anymore. She had anticipated these moves. She had prepared for them, and she refused to be drawn in. Her strategy was simple: remain calm, collect evidence, and act only on her terms. She went through every communication systematically. Social media posts were captured, calls logged, messages saved. It was like building a map of their emotional strategy, seeing the patterns and predicting the next steps. Each attempt at manipulation was documented, stripped of drama, analyzed for truth versus performance. Her calm was deliberate. A shield as powerful as any legal document or bank transfer. She wasn't ignoring reality. She was controlling how she engaged with it. Days passed with this tense quiet. The silence between actions was deliberate on her family's part. They were trying to create doubt, to make her question her resolve. Jane didn't. She sat with the records, reviewing each one, confirming timelines, ensuring every detail was accounted for. Her mind, trained in analysis and precision, turned the chaos into a strategic plan. Each attempt at emotional manipulation became a predictable variable she could manage. The fear that had once governed her choices was replaced by controlled awareness. Through all of this, Jane felt a strange mixture of detachment and empowerment. Detached from their emotional outbursts, she could see the mechanics of manipulation with clarity. Empowered because she had taken steps to protect her assets, her home, and her future. The stakes were high: property, money, personal freedom, but she had constructed a fortress of preparation, evidence, and clarity of purpose. Every frantic text, every social media post, every missed call reinforced the necessity of her calm, measured approach. By the end of the first week, Jane had effectively neutralized their emotional leverage. They were frantic, scrambling to provoke a reaction, but she was beyond the need to justify herself. She had the documentation, the legal counsel, the financial control, and most importantly, she had internalized the lesson that her autonomy could not be compromised by manipulation. The tension of ignoring their panic attempts was immense, but it was a controlled, conscious tension. She was aware of every move, every implication, and every potential outcome. This wasn't avoidance, it was strategy. In those long, quiet evenings, Jane realized something profound. The power her family had wielded over her for years, the emotional blackmail, the subtle coercion, the expectation of obedience was no longer effective. She could observe, document, and respond on her own terms. Her calm, seemingly passive demeanor was actually active and forceful. It was control exerted without reaction, power manifested through restraint. Each moment of silence, each unreturned call, each documented post was a barrier against manipulation and a step toward full autonomy. Jane felt a sense of quiet satisfaction as the days wore on. The emotional assaults were relentless, but they no longer held sway. Her strategy had worked. She remained composed, methodical, and unreactive, while every desperate attempt at manipulation only added to the record she was compiling. This evidence, collected systematically, was not just protection, it was power. She was no longer the reactive participant in their games. She was the orchestrator of her own boundaries. The tension of ignoring their attempts to provoke her became a testament to her agency, a clear demonstration that she would no longer be controlled, manipulated, or guilted into compliance. By the time a week had passed, the onslaught had quieted somewhat, but Jane's resolve had solidified. She had documented everything, safeguarded her assets, and established a new pattern: calm, strategic, and unassailable. She understood that the ultimate control she had over this situation wasn't emotional. It was procedural, grounded in evidence, law, and preparation. And in that clarity, she found a profound sense of empowerment, a recognition that she had finally stepped outside the cycle of manipulation and was standing fully in control of her life and her future. The moment Jane got the call from her lawyer confirming that the quitclaim deed had been signed by her father, notarized, and returned was surreal. She felt her knees go weak, her hands trembling, and then, slowly, an overwhelming sense of relief washed over her. It wasn't sadness, exactly, or anger. It was a complex cocktail of liberation, vindication, and sheer, unadulterated relief. For the first time in more than a decade, she was fully, completely in control of her life. The condo was hers, solely hers, and the joint account, the instrument of years of subtle coercion, had been closed. The funds safely in accounts she alone controlled. Everything that had been tangled in obligation, guilt, and silent expectation had been untangled. And she could finally breathe. She sat on the edge of her couch, staring out at the city lights through the wide windows of her condo, letting the reality settle in. The familiar hum of traffic below, the glow of distant skyscrapers, the quiet apartment filled with plants and sunlight. It was hers in every sense that mattered. Every mortgage payment, every down payment sent, every small renovation she'd painstakingly budgeted was now unchallenged, unquestioned, truly her own. And in that moment, Jane felt the gravity of freedom, the weight of years of silent service lifting from her shoulders. The weeks that followed were intentionally quiet, reflective, and deliberate. She didn't rush into celebration or even conversation. She spent mornings reviewing her finances, now fully transparent to herself, without the shadow of shared accounts or unspoken expectations. Automatic bill payments, carefully organized, left her with a sense of order and control she hadn't experienced in years. She restructured her savings to include personal investments, a travel fund, and long-term retirement planning. Each adjustment, each account change, felt like reclaiming another piece of her independence, another brick in the fortress she was building around her life. Jane also started to reimagine her daily routines. The condo, once a functional space for sleeping and basic living, transformed slowly into a true sanctuary. She filled it with light, rearranged furniture to maximize openness, and added plants in every corner, creating a sense of vitality and calm. Mornings were no longer rushed with anxiety about unseen obligations. They became reflective, contemplative, and grounded in what she wanted and needed for herself. Coffee in hand, she would sit by the window, letting the city wake up beneath her, feeling a sense of quiet pride in the life she had meticulously built and now fully owned. The psychological shift was profound. Jane realized that for years, she had measured her worth through the lens of others' needs and expectations. Every act of care, every dollar transferred, every sacrifice had been filtered through the narrative of duty. Now, that lens had been replaced by clarity. She evaluated opportunities, decisions, and relationships through her own values and desires, rather than preemptively calculating the impact on a family system that had long taken more than it gave. It was a liberation that was both exhilarating and slightly disorienting. Freedom, after all, came with the responsibility of entirely self-directed decision-making. Even mundane tasks now held new significance, paying her own bills from accounts that were hers alone, scheduling appointments without consulting anyone else, planning weekend outings based solely on her desires. All of it was a daily reaffirmation of independence. She kept a small journal by her desk, documenting thoughts, reflections, and occasional bursts of gratitude. Each entry, though simple, served as a testament to her agency, a record of a life no longer mediated by the expectations and manipulations of others. The journal was part diary, part ledger of personal victories, financial, emotional, and practical. Relationships, too, took on a new character. Jane began nurturing connections that were reciprocal, grounded in mutual respect rather than obligation. She spent more time with her Aunt Elsie, whose consistent support had been a lifeline during the most trying moments. Their conversations were now unburdened by crisis, filled instead with shared reflections, plans, and laughter. Jane also allowed herself to engage more meaningfully with friends, building a network of support and companionship that existed independently of familial duty. It was a delicate but deliberate shift, learning to prioritize those who valued her as an equal, not as a financial resource or a caretaker. And then there were the small joys that had once felt indulgent, but now felt celebratory. Jane planned a trip to Italy for the following year, a long-held dream funded entirely by her own savings. Free of guilt or expectation, she pored over itineraries, wine regions, museums, and walking tours, savoring the thought that each reservation and each ticket represented personal choice, personal freedom. No spreadsheet would be required to justify the expenditure. No approval sought from family members whose needs had once dictated her life. It was hers, entirely hers, and the thought brought a deep, buoyant happiness. Financially, Jane's life felt stable in a way it never had. She reviewed her net worth statement one evening, the numbers reflecting disciplined saving, smart investing, and a decade of careful planning. Unlike before, These numbers were her own achievement, a reflection of her skills and diligence, rather than a contribution to someone else's dream or the family's expectations. She could see the direct correlation between her work, her decisions, and the security of her future, and it was deeply satisfying. The clarity of ownership and autonomy was almost intoxicating, a stark contrast to the subtle entanglements and shared responsibilities that had once clouded every financial decision. Jane's personal growth extended beyond finances. She explored new hobbies, reconnected with her passions outside the shadow of family obligation, and allowed herself moments of leisure and indulgence without guilt. The freedom to plan her days without compromise brought an almost meditative quality to her routine. Evenings were filled with quiet reflection, or reading, or music, or simply sitting on her balcony watching the city lights twinkle below. It was a deliberate practice of self-recognition, a celebration of her independence, and a reclaiming of time and energy that had been consistently deferred. Emotionally, the release was intense. She had carried guilt, obligation, and resentment for years, all masked under the guise of responsibility and love. But now, standing firmly on the foundation of her achievements and boundaries, those feelings transformed. The anger softened, replaced with a quiet satisfaction and self-respect. She allowed herself to acknowledge the years she had given, the sacrifices made without judgment, but also without compulsion to continue them. Her past actions were not mistakes. They were part of her story, but they no longer dictated her present or future. Jane also reflected on the lessons learned. She realized that financial support can be a form of love, but true love, real care, is reciprocal. It requires balance, mutual respect, and recognition of boundaries. She understood that she had spent years in a dynamic where this balance was absent, and that awareness was both painful and liberating. The recognition allowed her to move forward consciously, informed by experience and committed to maintaining the boundaries that now protected her autonomy. Her condo, now a fully realized sanctuary, symbolized this transformation. Every corner, every object, every plant and decoration represented choices made for herself. Free of external influence, the space embodied her independence, her meticulous planning, and her resilience. Sitting there, enjoying the quiet glow of the city, Jane felt a profound sense of home, not just as a physical space, but as a psychological state of security, autonomy, and peace. She was finally living in a place that reflected her priorities, her desires, and her identity. Financial independence, personal freedom, emotional clarity. These were the pillars of her new life. Jane could now engage with the world and with relationships on her own terms. She could support others, certainly, but from a place of choice and consent, rather than obligation or coercion. The emotional and strategic clarity she had achieved allowed her to navigate interactions, plan her future, and enjoy her successes without the shadow of manipulation. It was, in every sense, a reclamation of her life. Jane's story, while deeply personal, now carried a sense of universality. The struggle to set boundaries, reclaim autonomy, and establish personal agency resonates beyond the specifics of her family's dynamics. Her triumph was not just legal or financial, it was emotional, psychological, and spiritual. It was about asserting the right to a life guided by one's own values, to enjoy the fruits of one's labor, and to finally live free from the weight of imposed obligations. And so, in her condo, with the city stretching endlessly below, Jane felt a quiet, triumphant joy. The decade of labor, the years of emotional tension, the careful documentation, and strategic action had culminated in a life that was truly hers. She could plan, explore, dream, and live all on her terms. Her foundation was solid, her future secure, and for the first time in memory, the ledger of her life reflected only her choices. She had earned, meticulously and deliberately, the right to her own happiness, her own success, and her own peace. So that's Jane's story, taking back control, setting boundaries, and finally reclaiming her life. It's a reminder that sometimes the hardest battles are about protecting your own space and peace. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced a situation where you had to stand up for yourself? Drop a comment and share your experience. It's amazing how much strength we find when we decide our well-being matters. Here's to resilience, empowerment, and owning your story.